Alright, back to back with Resident Evil videos, and today I have for you a double-decker, the 2002 remake originally released for the Nintendo GameCube, and a prequel to the first game, Resident Evil 0, also originally released for the Nintendo GameCube just about 7 months after the remake. Now that is a fast turnover. Resident Evil was already one of Capcom's most prominent franchises, but by this time the franchise was seeing big developments. On top of having successful game after successful game, the franchise was going Hollywood. Yes, it was around this time that the first Resident Evil movie was released, directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. And opinions on the actual movie quality aside, and this series gets goddamn ridiculous as it continues along, it was nevertheless a big leap in exposing Resident Evil to a more general audience. There was even a series of books by S.D. Perry, set in their own continuity, since they were kind of written as the games were being developed and a bunch of liberties had to be taken. Still, I do hear some good things about them. Well, at least my buddy Lewis from Brain Scratch says good things about them. Might be worth a read if you're looking for more Resident Evil lore, who knows. Movies and books aside, the video games were still the primary moneymakers, and Capcom was now all in this next generation. At first, Capcom promised that the next major game in the series was being developed for the PlayStation 2. In fact, in case you didn't learn this already from about 5,000 other channels in the past 10 years, one of the prototypes of this upcoming Resident Evil would be the basis for the original Devil May Cry. However, Capcom would soon strike an exclusivity deal with Nintendo for the next 3 games, and development shifted over to the Nintendo GameCube. It's a deal that obviously didn't hold out completely for very long. All 3 of those games, them being Remake, Resident Evil 0, and Resident Evil 4, will later see re-releases on other non-Nintendo platforms. Remake and 0, not until years later to be fair, but Resident Evil 4, it wasn't even a year before it saw another release on the PlayStation 2. The GameCube had more horsepower, but the numbers didn't lie. The PS2 was the dominant console. It had more appeal thanks to its DVD drive, it had a stronger library, and there was still this lingering perception that Nintendo only developed games for children. Which is just, the days of their overzealous censorship sort of died out in the early days of the Super Nintendo, so I don't know how folks still thought that was the case even into the early days of the GameCube. But okay, the first game of the deal was a complete remake of the first Resident Evil, and that's what we're going to look at first. More accurately, the 2015 HD Remaster that was released for everything available at the time. This version came with a higher resolution, increased frame rate, and widescreen support, though since this game was originally developed for a 4:3 ratio, the game simulates 16:9 by cropping the top and bottom parts of the screen and slightly zooming the picture in. The camera still tilts up and down, so you don't have to worry about losing the whole picture. You can still see everything. But if you are bothered by the method, keep that in mind. Maybe you're better off playing on the original resolution. The remaster also added a new control scheme. Well, it's not technically new. I think Resident Evil 2 on the N64 did it first, but if you don't want to deal with the game's tank controls, there's a second option that's closer to true analog control. You don't have to worry about holding down a separate run button anymore. You can make turns on a snap. It's a great means of avoiding zombies when you don't feel like spending ammunition. But as this game is still heavily tied to pre-rendered camera angles, it could take some time getting accustomed to them. The angles change all the time, so yeah, the control's tighter, but you have to readjust a lot. I think you're better off with the original tank controls. The game was designed with those in mind, and I think it's important that you get the intended experience. But I understand if they're not everyone's cup of tea. I ended up using the alternate method for my Chris playthrough simply because, well, it's Chris in Resident Evil 1. Gotta find ways to make the journey less arduous. But don't get the wrong idea. I still have my issues with certain things, but this remake, one of the best. While the foundation is largely like the PlayStation original, Remake updates and redesigns many key elements that very much makes this redo its own experience. To start with the incredibly obvious stuff, the graphics and presentation, major overhaul across the board. This is a mansion that looks like it's been through a viral outbreak, and one that looks like an actual mansion. The Arcade mansion in the original kind of looked more like a studio or apartment at points, but every room, and I mean every room here, be it the mansion, the courtyard, the catacombs, the laboratory, there is this sense of dreariness, this sense of dread, this sense that something, anything, can just pop out from the shadows. The atmosphere is top notch and one of the best of the series, even to this day. The sound design puts a nice little bow on the package, emphasizing the terror of those things that go bump in the night and putting extra crunch on your weapons. It is so damn satisfying getting a headshot in this game. That is juicy. The opening isn't live action anymore, might be a downside depending on what you're looking for in Resident Evil, but this CGI opening is damn good anyway and doesn't feel as claustrophobic or sloppily edited. Though I realize it isn't very fair to compare this to the original because the original Resident Evil was a product of its time, and this game has the advantage of technological improvements made in the last 6 years. It's just, when you're telling someone why you'd recommend the remake over the PS1 game, this is the shit you likely mentioned first. The story is relatively untouched, but cutscenes and voice acting have obviously been revamped. That said, I don't have much to say about the acting itself. The original was so bad in performance and direction that, in a way, made it more endearing. Here, the cheesiness is considerably toned down, but it's not stellar. A different take and one that gets the job done, nothing more. A very personal thing here, but this is also the first game to have Jill Valentine's likeness be based on Canadian actress Julia Voth, and to me, this incarnation will always be my favorite Jill Valentine. Later renditions are by no means bad, and I dig the direction they're going in the upcoming remake, but I always like this version's more down-to-earth qualities. Outfit's still a little over the top, but she doesn't look like a runway model posing as a cop. I don't think so anyway. As for the game, again, fundamentally the same as previously. You control either Jill or Chris and you try to find a way out of the mansion while slowly revealing a secret conspiracy between the mansion outbreak and the pharmaceutical company responsible, Umbrella, through examining these diaries and research files you come across during the adventure. Though you have some advantage if you played the original before this, Remake does go out of its way to alter some rooms and puzzles, sometimes simply to spite veteran players. But they also add some completely new instances. You got Richard here, who, in the original, you had to save by giving him serum for his poisonous injuries, only for him to die immediately after, thanks Richard. Ouch. But here, if you manage to save him, he still dies, either by giant snake or giant shark, but hey, you get his assault shotgun, and that weapon is pretty awesome. When you put a zombie down, they'll eventually come back as Crimson Heads, these super aggressive, incredibly fast upgrades. I cannot stand them, but they can be prevented if you manage to decapitate the zombie beforehand with a headshot, or if you burn the corpse after it's put down. Throughout the mansion, you can find these canisters of kerosene, and combined with the lighter, you can roast these zombies good, but you only have so much kerosene to go around, so you have to carefully consider which zombie is best being burned, if it's a room you find yourself visiting a lot, or which zombies you can safely get around. As much as I hate the idea of encountering a Crimson Head, I can't help but appreciate the amount of tension it puts on me. If I find myself accidentally killing a zombie, I'm like, oh shit, I better get some kerosene and deal with this now because I do not want to deal with this asshole later. Yes, this can force you to backtrack when you don't want to, especially as Jill because she doesn't come with a lighter pre-equipped like Chris does. But again, I appreciate how it's ingrained in the game's aesthetic. This is a game that wants to scare you, or at the very least, make you incredibly uneasy. But it's not all grim and gloom if you have to fight one of these things. They're not super hard to take down, they just really hurt. But with enough planning, you can get through relatively unscathed, and Remake even gives us these new defensive items like daggers, taser rounds, and flash grenades that you can use automatically to get yourself out of a bind. There isn't a bunch to go around, but carrying one can release some of the tension. Just make sure you're using it on something that matters and not something you know for a fact you can just easily ignore. Then you got this one, Lisa Trevor, a girl who was the subject of many awful experiments in her youth that left her a lumbering wreck that can easily kill you if you're not careful. She's one of the more tragic conclusions of the series thus far, and there to remind us that the folks over at Umbrella are, monsters. The biggest monsters of Resident Evil aren't the zombies or bioweapons, it's man. While not as persistent or imposing as Mr. X or Nemesis, and you only run into her on a couple of occasions, Lisa Trevor is no less disturbing, and one you don't want to spend much time goofing around her. The way she's introduced is a little odd. You head inside this shed near the courtyard, and after spending some time, you're suddenly ambushed at the turn of the door, and you're knocked unconscious. But then you wake up and, oh, here you go, here's Lisa. So bizarre, maybe she thought you were already dead? It's hard to tell. I always dreaded this sequence near the end where you have to fill this fuel canister to get the main elevator working. The fuel needed has a nitro compound inside, meaning if you shake around too much while holding it, there you go, nice little sneak peek there. This essentially means you can't use your weapons or run while holding it. And even though I have the hindsight to kill things in my path beforehand, just to make sure I don't have to deal with anything along the way, I still tense up here. I keep my fingers far, far away from that run button. And when I was playing as Chris, remember how I mentioned that I used the alternate control scheme for most of my run? Not for here. I went back to tank controls because I did not trust myself to keep the analog stick slightly tilted to keep a comfortable walking speed. That, and like an idiot, I ended up not using any ink ribbons on this playthrough, so if I died here, that's about 3.5 hours lost. So why did I do that? Like I said, I am an idiot, and I really wanted that achievement. I love this game. I'm constantly at odds thinking which of the classic Resident Evils I like more, this or Resident Evil 2. I mean, I'll happily play both, but if I had to pick one, well, there's still a few warts to go around for this. Basically the same issues I had with the original. As much as I love the overall upgrade, Chris's scenario is still rife with the same backtracking issues I had before thanks to his limited inventory, the need of small keys to open specific locks, and now you've got the added problem with Crimson Heads throwing more in your pathway. They should have at least given him 8 slots for items. This might be a remake of the first game, but this is also after 3 other games that had much better inventories. Like before, I think Jill has the better campaign. She can't take much of a beating, but again, bigger inventory, she gets the grenade launcher and I love that gun. And the lockpick that ensures that you can unlock things as soon as you run into them ensures that things keep moving forward. Classic Resident Evil 2 has a better pace and structure compared to the setup of the mansion here. And no matter the character I'm picking there, I feel both have it better than either Chris or Jill have it in this game, remake or otherwise. Mechanically, I think Resident Evil 2 is better, but damn man, I can't deny how much better this remake does in both looks and atmosphere. As a game in the survival horror genre, this game is the cream of the crop, one of Shinji Mikami's best, one of Capcom's best. If you're looking for what might be the de facto classic Resident Evil experience, this is it. Resident Evil Remake is that game, and the HD remaster is a great way to get your hands on it. Yeah, but it wasn't enough that we got one of the best Resident Evil games of 2002, but later that very year, we also got Resident Evil 0, a prequel set a day prior to the events of the first game. So you remember last time when I mentioned that Code Veronica was essentially Capcom's apology for not getting Resident Evil 2 on the Sega Saturn? Well, I guess they also wanted to apologize to Nintendo fans for not getting the original Resident Evil on the Nintendo 64, despite giving us a fully functional and more than playable version of Resident Evil 2. Resident Evil 0 began life as a Nintendo 64 exclusive, with development beginning as early as 1998, right as Resident Evil 2 was released. Jesus Christ, they were writing up this game, they had Resident Evil 3 down the pipe for 1999, and they were working on Code Veronica all at the same time. Separate teams or not, that sounds like a fucking nightmare, milking that shit like it was Mega Man. But this iteration of Resident Evil 0 would be later scrapped, for as soon as Nintendo announced the GameCube, Capcom wanted to shift development to the upcoming console. Resident Evil Remake and 0 were developed almost side by side because of this shift, and there's many similarities you can spot between the games for better or worse. But simultaneously developed as they were led by 2 different teams. Remake at the helm of series creator Shinji Mikami, and 0 being led by Koji Oda, a system planner for the first Resident Evil on the PlayStation 1, and the one who directed the 2014 Strider, as well as Mega Man 11 in 2018. Resident Evil 0 places us in the shoes of Rebecca Chambers, rookie member of STAR's Bravo team. You know, the one that had Enrico? Yeah, this game takes place about a day before the events of Resident Evil 1, where we get a better picture of how things became so utterly fucked up for the doomed STARS team. This opening makes it sound like we're getting introduced to an episode of Twilight Zone, though.
A Midwestern town in America, Raccoon City. A solitary island far off in the sea, Rockfort Island. An island that would become the second Raccoon City, Sheena Island.
Wait, Sheena Island? I don't remember. Oh, from Survivor? Shit. Is that game canon? God damn it. I guess I gotta play that game later on. Not this marathon, though. That shit can wait. So we see this train with a bunch of folks inside, and suddenly we get this dude doing an opera number outside, and then all these leeches come out and start killing and infecting all the passengers. It's certainly a way to open a game, okay. But not too far from the incident, we see STAR's Bravo team dealing with a forced landing due to their helicopter engine losing power. Despite the sudden change in course, Bravo team begin their investigation on those bizarre murders they've been reading up on. They discover this flipped-over military police vehicle with the passengers inside long dead. Believing this to be the work of escaped convict Billy Cohen, who the police were transferring before things went south, Bravo team split up and start combing the area, completely unaware of the true terror they're about to experience. Rebecca stumbles upon the very train that just got ransacked by Opera Man and soon runs into both the undead and Billy Cohen, who had enough power to break out of one handcuff, but just couldn't be bothered to get rid of the second one. The two are forced to team up to survive their current predicament, and that is basically the whole plot. Rebecca and Billy teaming up to deal with Opera Man and his super leeches. These two are so inconsequential in this story because they have no real bearing on anything happening. They're two folks caught up in the middle of one man's plot for revenge. You got this man here, Dr. James Marcus, one of the founding members of Umbrella, along with Spencer, the dude I mentioned last time, and Edward Ashford of the Ashford family from Code Veronica. Dude had a massive hard-on for leeches and their potential in his biological experiments. Didn't think much of humans at all. In fact, he was not against using humans like college students and children for his own ends for the sake of getting results, and in time, Dr. Marcus would end up being the creator of the T-Vivity. But then, some odd years later, the dude would get assassinated by Spencer because Spencer's a dick, using Albert Wesker and William Birkin, former students of Dr. Marcus, to do the job. But thanks to the miracle of science and his queen leech, Dr. Marcus would soon be reborn into a much younger version of himself that controls leeches by singing opera. Yep. He wants revenge on Wesker, Birkin, Umbrella as a whole, and wants to watch the world burn. He is, in fact, the very reason why the viral outbreak occurred in the Arkham Mansion, kickstarting the whole Resident Evil series if you think about it. Resident Evil 0, like Code Veronica, is more about building the lore rather than being a self-contained story because, Christ, it is a terrible story. Rebecca and Billy don't really do anything except travel to the next area and deal with more creatures, and then by the end of it, Rebecca notices the Arkham Mansion and heads over there to rendezvous with the rest of her team, all two of them. There's some banter between William Birkin and Albert Wesker as they watch things unfold from behind the scenes, keeping a close eye on Rebecca and the whereabouts of Dr. Marcus, and I would have loved more of this. Maybe get some more out of these two than what was established in the original games, but it doesn't amount to much, just some files going slightly into their upbringing and some winks and nods to the other games. Wesker quickly leaves to begin his plans in Resident Evil 1, and Birkin makes some passing mentions of his G-Virus project. Remember? From Resident Evil 2? Yeah, said the thing. It's cool that they wanted to give Rebecca something to do because, well, yeah, after the first game, she just vanished. Jill had her own game, Chris was in Code Veronica, fuck, even Barry had a cameo in Resident Evil 3 if you got a certain ending, but Rebecca went away like her mid-80s bandana. Zero shows that even though she is a rookie, she can hold her own. In fact, she holds her own better here than she does in Resident Evil 1. Though you can argue by the time Resident Evil 1 happens, she's exhausted from the events that happen in this game. Though I can't explain why she can play the piano just fine in the first game, but struggles to do so in this one. What's that shit about? Besides showing competency in combat though, that's all Rebecca gets going for her. We start and end this game knowing about the same as we did with her in Resident Evil 1. This is Rebecca Chambers, rookie medic for stars. Oh, I'm sorry.
Stars.
Billy Cohen, I have almost nothing to say about this dude and his mullet. An ex-Marine that was convicted for murdering over 23 people during an overseas operation and was sentenced to death. Though it's clearly shown that Billy didn't actually murder anybody, and that the whole thing was a sneaky cover-up to hide their commanding officer's war crimes, Billy refuses to be open about it and suffers from PTSD. Okay, that much is clear, but what's supposed to be his character arc? Does he even have one? Is it learning to trust Rebecca more? That's never a point where that's at risk. Due to the severe circumstances, the two get along fine and rather quickly. Is he trying to clear his conscience? He knows he didn't kill anyone, but he doesn't admit to it, so why be so shut off from it? Is he lying and remembering things incorrectly to protect himself? Are we going to spend some time fleshing out how he's dealing with his traumatic experiences? Well, that is clearly not the focus of the story. It just serves as a rudimentary backstory that has no relation to anything happening. With the exception to elaborating on specific background elements on the sake of clarity, Resident Evil 0's plot is super inconsequential. Nothing really comes from it, easily skipped, and I can say that for the rest of the game too. This was my first time completing the game for this channel. This was when I skipped back in the day. I had zero interest in it until now. I knew about a couple of things thanks to the Let's Play we did on SGB a few years back, but for the most part, I was going in blind. I don't like this game. No siree, I do not. Where do I begin? So we have Rebecca and Billy as our playable characters this go around, and in a change of pace, you control both characters simultaneously in a single campaign. With a push of a button, you can switch characters and use them together to solve puzzles and practice a shitload of item management there. You know what? Let's start there. Half of your game is spent on item management, just fucking about with this screen. Both characters rock only 6 inventory spaces like Chris did in Resident Evil 1, so shit's gonna fill up fast, especially considering that there are an unhealthy number of items that take up 2 slots, including things that only took up 1 slot previously like the shotgun and grenade launcher. What a crock of shit. All just to put emphasis on this game's unique mechanics. There are also no item boxes in Resident Evil 0. Someone behind the scenes finally say, hey, that shit ain't realistic, and decided to scrap the mechanic entirely for this game. So how do you store items away for future use? You don't. You leave them on the floor and come back to them later when you inevitably need them, very much like the series' inspiration Sweet Home on the NES. Very odd time to be paying tribute to that game. Listen, I'll admit, I actually love that you can leave items you don't exactly need at the moment on the ground whenever you want. As convenient as item boxes were, having to go back to them to drop something or pick something up for one use was a little tiring, but this was circumvented by there being multiple item boxes that shared the same inventory. When you drop an item here, you have to go back to that specific spot to pick it back up, and there are no shortcuts around this. And on your first run, you have no goddamn clue on what you'll need at what time. Keys to certain doors, items needed to power something up, the usual stuff you might expect in this series. And to be fair to the game, when those kinds of items are required, you usually pick them up not too far from where it's needed. The worst you need to do is perhaps drop some ammunition, maybe a healing item if you know the pathway is clear. You clear up some room for the item and make your way to where it's needed. Then you go back to where you dropped off your stuff and add them back to your stock because shit, you don't know what's behind the door you just unlock. It's best to be prepared. This hook shot you pick up around the start of the game is the most egregious example. It takes 2 slots, you can only bring one character to the next area when you use it, so afterwards you either lug it around for a bit or you immediately drop it, only for you to suddenly need it again when you least expect it. This legitimately pissed me off. I've gotten annoyed by other things in previous games. There are other things I dislike, for sure, but this straight up angered me. This game made me hate the hook shot. One of my favorite items in the Zelda franchise. How do you hate a hook shot? Resident Evil 0 found a way. But really, this whole game is exhausting. The inventory management is a big sticking point, but the 2-person structure adds an extra step to solving puzzles and accessing new rooms. There are times where Rebecca and Billy have to split up, and when they're not focusing on their own routes and finding a way to get the two back together, they are figuring out the means to solve issues that require them transferring items to one another, and it's so dull. You pick up an item, it goes inside this box, you send it up, you switch characters, then you pick out the item, you switch back to the other character, and then you do it again. Bullets, healing items, important keys, whatever might be necessary, because again, you don't know what you might need at what time. And if, say, Billy is hurting for some healing items and needs something big, like a mixture, he has to rely on Rebecca giving him some because she's the only one that can combine herbs. I don't know why that's suddenly a thing, but it is here, so you have to put up with it. Also, can I not seriously put more than one item into these compartments? The guns I get, can't fit a shotgun into a shoebox, but healing herbs, bullets, there is clearly more than enough room for 2 or 3 of these things. What the hell? To go back to using 2 characters at once, honestly, I'm on and off with this. Having both available at the same time is a good way of dealing with threats. You give Rebecca a fire armor grenade launcher, Billy the shotgun or the magnum, give them the correct attack order, and you can lay waste to those zombies giving you trouble. The problem is, the game is still, for the most part, a classic Resident Evil. It is still set up like one, where healing items are scarce, ammunition is finite, and tough enemies fill the corners of a lot of rooms. These leech monsters that can take a humongous beating, assuming you're not using Molotov cocktails or flame rounds, the classic hunters that for some reason have incredibly wonky hit stun and get me locked into a corner easily, and these raging monkeys called eliminators that just love to bounce all over the room and dodge your bullets. Resource management is still very important, but now you have to worry about 2 characters at once instead of 1. And say you got both characters in one room and you don't want to waste any ammo, you have to 1, make sure your buddy's mode set to idle so that they don't automatically attack what's there, and 2, you have to maneuver around the threat with both characters, either by doing both at once or one at a time, which again, 2-step process to something that was originally 1. And if your partner gets attacked, you have to waste ammo to get them out of the bind and use a healing item to get them back to speed. Especially if it was Rebecca, because Rebecca is made of goddamn tissue paper in this. This is not how I like to enjoy my classic Resident Evil. I understand that this is the gimmick that defines the game, to set it apart from the rest, but I don't think it works. Resident Evil 5 would later attempt something like this again, and while that game has its own problems with ammo management, especially if you're using the AI as your partner, the game is better designed with it in mind if you ask me, and you're not required to switch between characters just for the sake of puzzle solving and what have you. Not to mention, you can play that game with a friend local or online, and you know what? That's something that would have made Zero a little more bearable. If this game had online co-op or maybe like split screen local given the setup, that could make for a less clunky experience. Clunky, yeah, that's the defining word I can use to describe Resident Evil 0. You know it's bad when I got negative vibes as early as the opening minute. The control layout is so backwards to previous games, especially compared to Remake, which I just finished before stepping into this game. I lost track on the amount of times I accidentally opened up the inventory when I meant to check the item on the ground, or when I opened up the pause screen when I meant to check the inventory, or when I opened up the map screen when I tried to aim my gun or call my partner to regroup. And none of the other preset layouts were any better. They each had their own style of awkwardness. I played the entire game with the alternate control playstyle just so I didn't have to deal with the run button being on the B button. That's just plain wrong. In the HD Remaster, you unlock this Wesker mode when you finish the game, where Billy is replaced with Wesker from his Resident Evil 5 days, and you gotta mind control Rebecca as his partner. A bit of a dark twist of the mechanic, but I do love those glowing red eyes. They really pop in the bleak environment. You could think of this as a form of catharsis if you really didn't enjoy your experience in the normal game. Rebecca isn't any different, but Wesker can charge up this death stare that kills anything in the room when it's powerful enough, and you can do it as many times as you want. If you want to go ahead and get a move on, you can also do this super dash and watch Wesker take off like the family brought home McDonald's. There's novelty here, and it is amusing seeing Wesker replace Billy in real-time cutscenes, but at this point, I was so done with this game, I had no more energy to spend on it. I was relieved to finally finish the game when all was said and done, but looking back, it was only because I had to finish it for this video, and I hate when it comes to that. The setup is not my cup of tea. It left me frustrated, agitated, and just straight up bummed because I didn't want that to define my last impression of the classic Resident Evil formula. Yeah, after this, classic Resident Evil was no more. Resident Evil 4 would change things up dramatically, which I'll cover next time. I know that, at least for your first time in these games, there is always a degree of getting caught off guard or being underprepared. Part of beating the game is adapting to the current situation, and if things don't work out, apply that knowledge for next time. It can suck, but most of the time I still find myself enjoying the ride. With this game, I felt whenever I was put into a bind it was for incredibly asinine reasons, and it kept irking me. Obnoxious enemy placement leaving me little option on how to approach things, tedious item management, and poorly thought out scenarios. Between these two, you only need to play Remake. Actually, now that I think about it, that's one more issue I have with Zero. I know I'm bitching about a lot of things here. Looking past all the other shit I mentioned, this game has no real sense of identity. You have the opening with the train, and that is a cool set piece, the best part of the game I think. But it's over in about half an hour, and afterwards you have another mansion, you have a facility, and you have a factory. These have been done before in better games. It is quite redundant and feels lesser, even with the better graphics. I think back to when Zero was originally a Nintendo 64 game, and how it was likely to make up for the fact that the console didn't get the first Resident Evil title. Maybe the intention was to replicate the first game's aesthetic and structure, while readjusting a small number of things to make it different enough, also that dedicated Nintendo 64 players could get a piece of the original game. But then, production shifted over to the GameCube, it's released just months after the remake came out for the same system, and what do you have left to show? A second-rate knockoff in my eyes. Before the mansion, there was another mansion. Before the disaster, there was another one. Evil is born. Okay, well that's on point. I've gained nothing from playing this. The worst of the classic bunch, no doubt in my mind. I can't recommend it, even at a budgeted price. Remake is all you're gonna need. Sorry, Rebecca, maybe next time. Maybe if this was my first Resident Evil, if I didn't play any other game prior to this one, I might have been a little nicer to it, but I tell you, this just wasn't the one for me. But as far as remakes go, we got another one coming up. The Resident Evil 3 remake is coming out this week. It's probably already out by the time this video comes up. So that's the subject for next time, and then I'm shifting back to Kirby to wrap that marathon up, and then maybe we can get some individual videos out as we go along. But I'll see you guys next time with Resident Evil 3 Remake. Thank you all for watching. Please stay safe out there. Wash your hands, wipe your ass, have yourselves a fantastic night, and take care. No, but seriously, you couldn't even use the hook shot as a weapon. You have Rebecca like aim at a zombie, you launch the hook, and you pull the zombie to you like Scorpion Spear, and then Billy like does like this combo uppercut attack and fucking knock him to the ground. Come on, that's money. would have made the hook shot a lot better.